There is no figure in world history quite like King Henry VIII, and yet he's probably best remembered today for having 6 wives. But this famous king's life was much more complicated than that. Henry presided over a golden age for the Kingdom of England. During his nearly 40-year-long reign, he helped break the dam of religious unity in Europe, led his country to victory against France, and transformed the English monarchy into one of the most formidable powers in all of Christendom. But the king's life took a very dark turn in 1536, when he fell off his horse during a jousting match. This wound up causing a horrible and slow healing ulcer that would eventually lead to the loss of his kingdom and the lives of thousands of innocent people. Let's find out more about what happened to King Henry VIII. On May 1536, Henry was participating in a tournament at Greenwich Palace. For 2 weeks, he and other nobles had been jousting and celebrating the upcoming marriage of Henry's daughter Mary to Charles Brennan, Duke of Suffolk. Henry, dressed in full armor, rode out onto the field. As he charged towards his opponent, he lost his balance, tumbled out of the saddle, and landed awkwardly on his left leg. Despite the intense pain shooting up his body, Henry remounted his horse and finished the tournament. But within a few days, he developed a fever and his left leg became swollen and discolored. Soon, the king was unable to put any weight on his leg, and it was clear that he had fractured it. Unfortunately, treatment wasn't really an option at the time because the leg wound festered and turned gangrene. It became horribly infected, and a foul-smelling ulcer took its place. Medical staff tried everything they could think of to treat the wound, but nothing worked. For 3 long months, Henry was forced to watch helplessly as his leg grew weaker and thinner, while the ulcer refused to heal. Finally, the pain subsided somewhat and the limb began to heal. But this was only an apparent recovery, because the battle against the disease was far from over. Ulcers returned every time Henry exercised or had a fever, each one worse than the last. The king's whole body started to weaken, and his doctors could do little to stop the ulcers from claiming more and more of his leg. At first, Queen Anne and her ladies-in-waiting nursed his sick Henry back to health. But after the king started calling them prostitutes, they ran away, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts and wounds. In the privacy of his bedroom, the king experienced many emotions: anger, frustration, despair, and fear. At times, Henry felt sure the ulcer would never heal and that he would die. There were moments when he thought about giving up entirely and letting God take him, but always he came back to reality. At least for now, he still had his power and his dignity intact. Henry used his position to spread propaganda and quashed rumors that he was dying. To protect his reputation, he had anyone spreading these rumors arrested and executed. But this couldn't stop the whispers forever. Henry knew that if he died without naming a legitimate heir, his dynasty might end with him. Without an obvious successor, England could descend into chaos. So he was desperate to recover, not only for himself but for his kingdom. Sadly, Henry's condition did not improve. The healing process was slow and painful, and it soon became clear that he would never be able to ride a horse again. This was a devastating blow to Henry, who had loved hunting and jousting. It also meant that he would have to drastically change his lifestyle. Now, facing the prospect of a life without exercise, the king's spirits sank even lower, and everyone around him sensed that something had shifted. Before the accident, Henry had been a healthy, athletic man who enjoyed riding horses, hunting wild boars, and hawking with his trained falcons. He had been known as the two-footed falcon for his skill in handling falcons and his ability to fly down from great heights. But now, that was all over. All Henry had to do was look down at his withered left leg to know it was true. Throughout his reign, Henry had dealt with many challenges, both foreign and domestic, but none of them had ever broken him before. While recovering from his injury, he went ahead and married Catherine Howard, one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting, despite the fact that she was only 17 years old. He also executed Thomas Cromwell, who had been one of his closest advisors since the 1520s, and played a key role in helping him break with Rome. In addition, Henry went to war with Scotland and France, and launched an attack on the island of Rhodes, home of the Knights of St. John. But none of this made him happy. After Catherine gave birth to a stillborn baby, Henry ordered her to be executed as well. In his mind, she had betrayed him by failing to produce a living son. While his power over his realm was undiminished, there was something different about Henry now. The accident had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. Even his closest advisors sensed that something was off about him. They knew that the king was in pain, but they didn't know the extent of it. No one dared ask him directly, so they just watched as he lashed out at them and everyone else who crossed his path. If someone looked at him the wrong way, he might accuse them of plotting against him and have them thrown into the Tower of London, where they would almost certainly be found guilty of treason and beheaded. Henry became so paranoid that he surrounded himself with armed guards everywhere he went, even inside his own palace walls. He couldn't trust anyone anymore and felt like everyone was out to get him. His chronic ulcers made him irritable and vindictive, lashing out at anyone who dared cross him. Another reason for Henry's bad temper was the fact that he was in constant pain. His leg would throb and ache incessantly, and he could never get a good night's sleep. He became a prisoner in his own chambers, too afraid to venture outside and face the jeers and pitying looks of the people. His weight started to increase dramatically, going from 19 stone to over 300 pounds in just a few years. This made it difficult for him to move around and aggravated his ulcers even more. In the end, Henry VIII died on January 28th at the age of 55. He had reigned for nearly 38 years, longer than any other king of England before him. Despite being one of history's most renowned rulers, little is known about Henry's childhood. Records indicate he was born at Greenwich Palace on June 28, 1491. He was the second surviving son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. At the time, his father was eager to see him wed and produce heirs. As a result, Henry was betrothed to the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon when he was just 11 years old. However, he never married her. Instead, he married twice more during his lifetime. His second wife was Anne Boleyn, whom he married in 1533. She gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, in September 1533. Then there was Catherine Parr, whom Henry wed after an execution in 1536. Catherine bore Henry no children, but served as a stabilizing force during his later years and outlived him. After Henry's death, his son Edward succeeded him at the age of 9. Henry's will provided for his children's upbringing, but the young king needed more guidance than usual because of his poor health. This meant that several advisors and ministers, including his mother, Catherine Parr, effectively ran the government until Edward came of age. Although Mary and Elizabeth lived through the reign of their half-brother, Edward, they spent much of their early adulthood in exile. Mary because she had been declared illegitimate by their father, and Elizabeth because she had been declared illegitimate by both parents. Both sisters returned to England. After Edward's death in 1553, Mary ascended to the throne and Elizabeth took refuge in the courts of European nobility. Following Mary's death in November 1558, Elizabeth became Queen of England and Ireland. She reigned from 1558 to 1603, making her the second longest reigning monarch in English history after Queen Victoria. Henry VIII remains one of history's most colorful figures. He was a Renaissance prince who loved the arts and culture, but he was also a brutal autocrat who didn't hesitate to use violence to achieve his goals. His chronic ulcers may have robbed him of his mobility, but they couldn't touch his indomitable spirit. If you liked this video, please remember to subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching.